I wasn't going to say it, but the phallic symbols are everywhere in this garage. You know, it's the only way I feel secure in my masculinity.
That's it.
Is to be I have to hold it.
You have
because
to
it will
hold
get
it.
away from me.
Otherwise,
It'll get away from
hold
me.
it.
Just don't get away. Don't get away. Oh no, it's running. It's running. No. Yes. That's why I have a stick. I'm glad you saw into that. Thank you, Aspasia. It's a gift.
That's
It's a
my
gift of
job. I
insight.
just analyze.
Yeah, it's just what I do. It's my bread and butter. It's my friggin' bread and butter.
I have problems with applying my makeup. It gets in my eyeball, and then
I salute you. I've never had the problem of having to deal with makeup, and I salute all women for taking on that challenge.
Daniel.
Because
I thought you were going to
miserably.
salute me because you were going to say you've never had that problem with your makeup. You know how to apply it correctly. It doesn't get in the eyeball.
Big time. I put it up here. This is how I do my makeup.
Yeah,
it's really great.
Called a cat eye. That's called a cat eye. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hot. It's in Cosmopolitan. I've seen it.
It lifts your cheekbones.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you look more youthful.
My eyes hurt so bad. I've seen your work. It is 1,000 times more edits than I've ever done. You use graphics and things and intros. Intros, it's crazy.
Watch out for that
intros. I can't wait.
I mean, it was definitely a perspective shift coming out of that. There's literature and sections of YouTube that I never visited that I'm hanging out on and that kind of thing. So
you know something's transformative when it opens up new sections of YouTube.
Yeah, I know. I threw the algorithm for a loop.
When the makeup gets in my eyeball, I just pop these on. This is much more discreet.
Or for the client, you just can't break through to the next sort of level.
Yes, I put these on during session.
And then they break through.
And just say nothing about it. Like, just let's see what happens.
Oh, please tell me. Please tell me you do that. That would just be like...
I over-interpret their response.
It's great to get the band back together.
It was.
Yeah, man.
It was.
Bam. Got the band back together. We're back. We're back. Spinal Tap. We were talking about masculinity in the meta crisis, and a thing that came up that I think about a lot is the problem of like defining masculinity, for example. We were just also describing that this also appears in like a novel like Eraser by Purcell Everett, on the idea if you try to define blackness, it's very problematic. If you try to define whiteness, like there's always this problem when you try to define what a thing is. Yeah. But then if you leave it entirely open, that also seems problematic, right? So how exactly do you have a determination or that doesn't, like, how do you have a definition that doesn't control you and doesn't like leave out? And kind of thinking about actually as, say, masculinity or all of these different signifiers as a particular work to leave an openness for what the thing is to unveil itself to you, right? And I was kind of just making an example where, you know, Heidegger is like Dasein is, is a being for whom being is a question, you know. But like Simone de Beauvoir in Second Sex, there's this idea that philosophy has not asked the question of what is a woman, because man has been a universal sort of category. And it's almost like for Simone, there's this idea that being is told to you, like being is something you're told. Whereas for the male, being is a question because of this kind of universal thing. And actually the idea today is as a kind of gift for some of the progress of, some of the movements of even wokeism or progressivism is this idea that now even masculinity is a question to the male, which means they have to see how they respond to people telling them what masculinity is in the same way that Black people have had to experience being told what blackness is, and how actually what a thing is can emerge in that space of how you have to respond to someone determining you, as opposed to you just kind of finding it in the abstract. And the idea then is a grassroots movement that can spread to actually sort of change political and socioeconomic possibilities, is a spreading of the kind of subjectivity that submits itself to that work. And I think these online spaces can kind of contribute to that. And I think you can only do that with others. I think when you try to, I think like having hard definitions of what things are also a response to a world lacking the social coordination mechanism where you're not easily able to meet people that can help things emerge with. So you have to create a definition for yourself that you bring into the world. But now because we're kind of better at coordinating with diversity like we're doing right now, we can actually move to a place where we hold open spaces where things can be unveiled to us. And that's what I think we need to do to really kind of find out what it is to be human, masculine, feminine, all these different things. So that came up in a bunch of other Yeah.
It makes me think of when we were talking the other day, so talking about the fuzziness of the human being, you know, like just thinking about like a fuzzy definition as opposed to something very rigid or all-encompassing, and sort of leaving the door open for updating these things and the growth of these things, as opposed to, it's a tricky area though, I understand. Yeah, I think too there's something about the experience, and I mean I think a lot about younger people, but I think just people in general, of like accepting some of these definitions that are being given externally, provided externally to us, without even consideration of whether or not it links to something more internal, right? Or to even reflect on it at all, to do any kind of, you know, philosophy or reflection around it. I think what can be so tricky about that is it's often done. I mean, there's been a long history of it not being done this way, and it's often not done this way, but it can also often be done from a very sort of this presentation of a very warm, loving place. I am empowering you. I am like telling you this definition of what you are, and I am, you know, it's a very tricky thing to navigate. And I think a lot of people, I mean, we all take part in it, inadvertently also doing that to one another all the time, just with sort of built-in assumptions, and how we speak to one another. There are a lot of built-in assumptions that I think link to these definitions, and I think I mean, yeah, it's kind of all goes back to the same sorts of things, and it goes back to authentic resonance, for me, essentially, because it's really, I think we're pointing to the importance of obviously wrestling with all of this together. That's completely necessary, but it's also the yeah, like the willingness to not just accept what an other says to you, right? It's to sort of the stop and the pause and the reflect and the sort of going inward for a moment, and a checking the sort of authentic resonance. And then obviously the going and speaking to trusted friends and having conversations like this. Yeah, and once again, in a world that moves, you know, a million miles an hour, like we are currently, and the way that that's encouraged, and we are sort of being purposely distracted in 500 different directions, and messaging, just all the messaging everywhere of all these things, and you know, well, it's quite, I think it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult for people to even pause for long enough and realize that this might be happening, like just sort of the accepting of definitions, if we call it that. And I think even like, I mean, if we use something like masculinity or femininity, like even if there's a recognition of a sort of, someone's trying to box me in this way or something, I don't, and then there's maybe like a turn towards a different form of what does masculinity mean to me or something. Even in the doing that, there is a lot of sort of still seeking outwardly for that. I don't really know how to explain that, which is still important, but there is some component here, I think, of almost, well, it's a back and forth and almost defining on one's own terms inwardly. Defining is not really the right word, just like yeah, I don't really know if this is making sense, to be quite honest. But there is something about the going inward, and then I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes it's a little bit like people. It's almost like a smorgasbord or something. Like people, it's sort of like, oh, I don't like that version of a definition or something. So sort of find my camp of people who have the one that I do like, right? Which is, you know, it can be a starting point and everything, but rather than also bringing one's own into thinking about what it might mean to me, or how I want to relate to this term, or it's sort of like, I don't like this club, so I'll find the club that I do like. As opposed to something more of a fuzziness, which sort of implies that maybe there is something from, you know, different clubs that sort of is right for me, if that makes some sense. There you go, that's fuzzy.
Well, just as a very quick comment, I mean, what you're saying that it makes me think about that. Philip Reeve has that very interesting line where he says that people don't want to just choose; they want to feel chosen.
Yeah.
A- and yet, there's also a way in which people don't want to be told what they are. I don't want to be told by my parents I'm going to go into blacksmith. I don't want to be told what I am. I want to find it for myself. But then there's also something about human beings that they they also want to just realize something that they feel is fitting for them. And I think this is kind of ground zero for authentic resonance talk, because there's a certain fittingness, right? So there's a weird thing in which if something feels imposed in the wrong way,
Mm.
then I feel restricted and I don't want it and I rebel against it,
Mm.
right? But if nothing feels like if there's nothing that I feel like I fit into at all, or that in a sense is calling me as a religious language, you can even talk about language, you can even talk about anointing, these kind of calls, then there's something about the human being that doesn't do very well, right? And so, what exactly are the conditions? Because I think there are many, many people that would love to know or think about how do I increase the probability that I feel chosen or that I feel in fittedness, that I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be, right? Because there are many people, you hear them talk, will be like, well, some people seem to just know and maybe they don't or they wonder about it. Like, what are the conditions that make that happen where you have that feeling of chosenness or you go, this is fittedness, right? That makes it come about. And it is just very, very interesting that I think basically the political question, because there's something about a lot that comes down to political questions in various forms. It just depends on what we mean by that. Is we've been caught between the tension of totalitarianism and freedom, not having freedom or being free. But it turns out now we need to think about the political for fittedness, where we feel free in something, right? We feel free in a direction, free in a determination, right? And how do you strike that middle? How do you strike that mean? What does it mean to do that well? What is the work that enables a person to so live their life? So that was coming to mind.
Well, something that was really interesting to me in this discussion on masculinity was, yeah, as we said, there's really no agreed upon definition. There are many definitions at this point, but as gender roles continue to evolve and, the shape of the family or even what it means to have a career, all of these things are changing so much. Kind of what I landed on is, well, the experience of being a man is the experience of being unable to define yourself. And I mean, that might not be that's not a definition, but that is a shared experience. I guess that's what I want to say. Like Aspasia is saying, we can go around and look for the group that, we like the definition. But I think we could speak more broadly to, maybe the liminal web or something like that. But I think there are people in the world who like there's a specific, or maybe there's many, but there are people in the world who have the sense of, I don't know where I fit in, or I don't know how to define myself. And yet there's enough that they begin to meet other people like them and resonate in that experience. And it's a kind of a funny place to be like, well, I seem to slip through the cracks. Oh, you slipped through the cracks? And now we can tell each other stories about slipping through the cracks. And maybe we did it in different ways, but we resonate on this. That's really interesting. I haven't been involved in men's work for that long. It's maybe a little over a half year. But one of the things that's happened for me, I mean, what does it mean to be a man? If you had asked me that 10 years ago, I would have just sort of I wouldn't have known how to do anything with the question at all. I mean, I think I would have been aware of like a feeling of I'm supposed to know what that means. And then if I don't know what that means, maybe some sort of inadequacy that comes up around it. But, and I could probably point to movies or point to other cultural I could point to other places in the culture where there are definitions of manhood, but I would say, well, that's what I mean. I know that the way I was raised, there was, this idea of patriarchy or toxic masculinity. Well, this was like how not to be a man. But then that's a negative definition. So don't do that, don't do that. So what do you do with that? At this point, so one of the books that I recently read, which is sort of a well-known book in this sphere, is Iron John by Robert Bly, and Robert Bly, I knew of him as the poet. I didn't realize he had been this sort of organizer of all of these men's conferences for years in Minnesota, and everything he did. But one of the themes is that modern men don't go through initiation. So they don't, get tested. They don't, and then more specifically, there's the idea that men and women all begin their life in a woman's womb, right? But then a girl is just, going to stay or not stay necessarily attached to her mother, but her mother is actually something like the blueprint that you can follow. But if the little boy is with, his mother, and little kids, boys and girls, tend to be with their mothers, in a lot of traditional societies, the men would literally come and take the boy away. And there could even be, Robert Bly sort of tells it in a humorous way where he'll say, I think he's referring, I can't remember where he's drawing on different, stories from different traditions, but he would say, well, the women fight back, but the men take the boy away, and then the women will show up again, with spears, and then the men will chase them off. And he says, and then the women will go have coffee and say, was I convincing? Did it look? Because the point being that the women on some level also know that the boys can't stay in this, sphere, but okay, nothing that resembles that in any way, shape, or form happened in my life, right? But it becomes like symbolic. Like, so what is the realm of the feminine? Is this warmth? Is this comfort? Is this nurturing? What is the realm of the masculine? Well, is it, going out and facing risk and all of these things? Well, this is all just, I mean, these are archetypal patterns, and yet they meant something when we lived in a village. They meant something when we were hunter-gatherers. They meant something there. Now they're somewhere deep in our biology or our psyche or our historical memory or something, but we are, how do we recreate that now? There is no blueprint particularly. I mean, the men's movement is one answer for this. And what do men's groups do? They will do weekends in the wilderness. I mean, when I went on this particular trip recently, growing up, my family did not go camping. We did not, so we were going to chop firewood, and I swung an axe, and someone showed me how to use an electric saw. And, but I literally had never had the opportunity. Right. And there was something there where I felt useful in a way. And the other thing, the older men who come and take the boy, and of course, there's stories of initiation rites that would horrify us, right? That are like lifelong scars, But then there's also just the question of mentorship. Is there an older man who mentors? Like, one of the things Robert Bly would say is, every man should admire a younger man. So, and a younger man who never feels admired by an older man that's a wound. That's a serious wound. So I'm sharing a little of what I've gotten recently. I'm far from. I'm not here to say that I can explain the men's movement or explain all those things. But what I wanted to point to is, like, all of these questions are now on the table for me in a new way. And when I grapple with them and I read some of this just description of the initiation and the reasons given for it and what happens if you're not initiated, it does give me a whole new lens on my life. Will I do men's work forever? I don't know, but there's something that's very fresh. And we're often talking in reference to the work of O.G. Rose and the idea that we've lost the givens. I mean, I think what is a man? What is a woman? In some ways, those are givens that, I mean, those givens might be have a little more staying power than some of the other ones that have been lost. But they're definitely muddier than they used to be. Yeah, I'll just say though that what's really interesting for me is the sense of, oh, here's a whole set of questions that I haven't asked myself before that feel really relevant. But what is the answer to those questions? I mean, it's very wide open. So that's where I would come back to saying, like, in the men's group on the retreat, a lot of what I feel I was bonding with other men about was partly the confusion or the overwhelm of how do we answer these questions. There is no North Star to necessarily point to. But I do think it's interesting that shared experience of confusion. And I think, we could expand this out beyond the question of masculinity to many other questions. But, if we don't have shared definitions, we can have a shared lack of definitions.
Yeah. When you said that question initially there, Seth, what does it mean to be a man? The first words that came into my mind were crushing pressure, right? Like I just thought crushing pressure, like that's, I think about, I mean, I would have worked with more men than women in the course of my career. And I worked for a period of time in a prison setting. And so I worked with a lot of men there as well. So I just, crushing pressure came to mind, right? So that was the first thing I was thinking. And then as you continued to talk, I sort of was asking myself internally, well, what comes up if I say the same thing? What does it mean to be a woman? And I'm talking about like these days. And the same words came up, crushing pressure. Now they felt very different, but they were the same words. Is kind of the best I can give. So even though they came as the same words, they sort of had like a very different picture or like undergrowth attached to it or something. But it's just very interesting that they come with the same words and yet there was still, my experience of those arising was very different, if you follow. But I do think this speaks to what you're talking about there with confusion as well, because I was also thinking, I think there's a lot of confusion too for women. It's a similar thing. What does it really mean these days now? And there's a lot of choice for women too about what it's going to mean for them, and a lot of confusion. But I did also want to just sort of make the distinction, just because I think it's important for some reason, that there's obviously man, woman, and then there's masculinity and femininity, and like they are different things. They're used differently by different people. But I think maybe part of what we're pointing to is that, it used to be a much sort of clearer distinction that, to be a man is, primarily a masculinity, like being in touch with a masculinity, right? And for a woman, it's a being in touch with a femininity. It's just not like that. It's just not like that anymore with the conditions of the modern world. And, I think that adds to the mix of all of this, and actually spending some time sort of teasing those things apart a little bit is important, and recognizing that we all have masculine and feminine drives within us and streams within us. Doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. And there's sort of a way that those things are relating inside us as well, all the time. That's really important to all of this. And when we think about things like partnerships, it's also how each of those streams within each of us is relating to the other ones too. So it becomes this very dynamic tangle, and that's only two people, and then then you have a group, and then it multiplies. But I did appreciate the what you're saying on initiation rituals, and it was something I did a deep dive on a long time ago now. So I have to try and pull that information somewhere out of my brain to bring it in, but it will come. What did I want to say about that? What I wanted to point to about that is I think and I know now I'm talking about women, but whatever, that's fine. We can come back to men. I think for like well, no, it relates. So for men, there is this kind of lack now of, you know, things like the initiation rituals and just markers, these key markers of developmental change. For women, I think there are just some things biologically that, you know, I was going to say we can't erase, but that are just more prominent still, that kind of it adds a bit more. It's sort of undeniable for a woman how different they are, I guess, because of that. So I'm just thinking about things like menstruation, pregnancy, like these very sort of firm, like biological processes that are, well, I was going to say are going to happen no matter what. You don't have to get pregnant, but you know what I'm saying. Like they are just sort of once you decide to get pregnant, if you are pregnant, like what happens to your body is completely outside of your control now for 9 months, and it's just it's very, I point that out because it's just very clear how different you become to a man. Like there's just these key things that really point out sort of like how different you feel to a man. And I do think the menstrual cycle is like that. There's a few things like that. It's not to say men don't have certain things that I'm sure are like that as well. But not entirely sure what I'm trying to say there. But I guess I'm empathizing with what you're sort of sketching out there about for men. There seems to just be more of a kind of like an open pasture and like a lack of all these sort of structures and social conventions and initiation rituals and all these sorts of things that used to be there that sort of would hold them in their masculinity, or sort of put some sort of, like we were talking about earlier, some sort of shape around it and support around it. Whereas now I just kind of almost imagine, and I can only imagine because I'm clearly a woman, but you know, like I can just imagine this like almost like, yeah, like looking out just this big open field. And it's like, well, where am I going to go? What direction am I, like, it's just is it too much possibility or just a lack of something? There's like a lack of being held maybe in some way. And I just want to say that for women, I do think there is some of that. I don't want to imply that I think women don't have that. They do, but there's a bit more shape that's provided necessarily by some biological realities, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And lots of people are not going to like that I've brought in biology, but so be it. So be it. I think there are some undeniable differences biologically. I think that's an important starting point. Yeah.
Excellent. There's a storm coming, so let me know if I vanish suddenly. I'll get the other internet thing. So perhaps we can generally say, and very speculatively, based on what Reef was saying, there is something about men that is harder to feel chosen, but it's easier to have choice. And thus it feels empty. Where for a woman, because of the biology, it might be easier to feel chosen, but not to have choice. And if you feel chosen and not enough choice, you feel oppressed. But if you have a lot of choice, but you don't feel chosen, then it feels arbitrary and empty, right? So there's an interesting sort of tension there between those. Second, I'm thinking about when you were saying on, male and masculine are not the same, female and feminine. If I were to speak from personal experience, it sounds very odd to say, but I've had experiences of men that were so masculine, it was as if they were bad at being men. They were so masculine that they actually weren't good at being men. In the same way that you can have a certain encounter, well, I'll say with women who are so feminine that they're not good at being women. And there's a weird thing there where when you encounter a male, at least in my experience, when you encounter a man who almost feels like they're trying too hard, like they're trying too hard to be masculine, or they're overly masculine, there's a robot. Yeah, that's great, Aspasia. There's a certain sort of program it's almost like they have a program that is running them more than them running it, right? And I think that's a real issue. But then you see the problem seems to be that now I think there are, perhaps, to be charitable to some more in the state's progressive leanings, there's a saying, well, yeah, that's a real problem, so let's get rid of masculinity for the sake of the men. But then that also seems to go too far, because then you need some sort of direction, right? You need some sort of towardness. And that, I think, brings me to the third thing I'm thinking about, is about this idea of, the openness of the question, what is a woman, what is a male? And what that makes me think about is, how do you become the kind of being of whom can even answer questions? Like, there's almost a deeper question, like, what does it mean to be the kind of person for whom questions can be answered, right? Because it's almost as if there are some things that either have to stay questions, or we have not met, or second, well, there's a few things. There are some questions that you cannot answer without killing something. Like, if you answer them, something die, right? But then maybe there are questions that actually can be answered, that should be answered, but we have to meet certain conditions to answer them, right? And then third, there's the question of how you would even go about running that experiment to find out, right? And then four, what would it mean to answer a question? What is the function of the word answer, right? And I guess for me, I think about this a lot, because the moment I tell you what is a male, or what is the sublation of capitalism, or what should be the political order, or what we should do, there seems to be a problem. There seems to be something top down, right? But then you run this, and this has come up at the net, and I know we've talked about this lame middle, where I'm not going to give any prescriptions, because that would be, forceful, but there's this kind of cowardliness there if you're not careful, right? And I think all of this, like, I think there are a lot of questions today in the political, in the economic, in the social, in the religious, where you feel like if you give an answer, you've messed something up. If I say, what is the Christian, I've got a problem. If I say, what is the just policy of the government, I've got a problem. If I say that, there's a problem. So there's this feeling of a certain openness, but then the problem is, how do you keep something open and yet that still put a demand on you? Because I can say, I'm not going to take a position on, let's say, what's going on in Iran right now. Even mentioning that, you feel attention, right? But let's say, well, I don't know what's right and wrong, right? That puts no demand on me. And so that seems problematic. But then it also seems problematic for some guy in a garage in Virginia to be saying, what is the correct policy in Iran, right? And, you can say, well, it's obviously this, it's obviously that. And, you get into that game, right? So there seems to be some tension. And it also seems problematic to say, well, I don't want to say what a man is, right? Because it's not up to me. It's like, oh, so you're saying it's up to everyone? And then the social order falls apart. So there's some sort of tension on how do we even be a being who can answer questions, if that makes sense, or rightly approach questions. Now, the next part I want to say is, I think the question now is, what does it mean to answer something? And I do go to this idea of Wittgenstein when he says something like, we think what we want, and it came up earlier, we think what we want is a definition, but really we want a description. And what he means by that is, we don't want a definition, we want a novel, right? Like, likewise, we don't want the answer of what is the male, we want a novel, an artwork, a painting, a model, right? Like, we want a vision more so, in a sense, right? Okay, well then, and I think that's basically the truth, is like, we don't want a definition of what true Christianity is. We want a vision of seeing it. We want a piece of art, right? We don't want a definition of what the best political position is. We want to see it. We want a vision of society. We don't want to be told what the feminine is. We want to encounter it and be surprised by it in ourselves as well. And so it goes with the masculine, right? Because if we are not so surprised, then it feels like an arbitrary choice versus something we've chosen. And we've also talked about in the past about the importance of dynamic living environments, so that we can encounter things that feel more alive. But this is what I want to say. I guess I'm thinking of my own, my own personal experience, and it came up earlier. For me, on the question of the correct orientation to a question of, say, what is masculinity, is a certain self-forgetfulness where you don't think about what is masculinity. But here's the problem. Your brother needs help cutting down a tree. You go over and you're not able to help, and you think about being a male, right? Or you go into society and you're incompetent in something, and even if you don't want to think about it, the world makes you think about it, right? So you can't, then you become pathological and anxious, and then you want to overcompensate and there's a problem, right? So then for me, I want to be able to say, use a handsaw or lift enough weights to be able to help with a tree, not to like prove my masculinity, but to forget about masculinity. Because if I'm able to actually cut down the tree without any problem, I don't reflect on myself. It's like a doorknob that works. You just smoothly go over it, right? So there's a weird way for me that the question of masculinity, you actually become, in my opinion, and now I'm a little bit interchangeable with male and masculinity, but I am going to say masculinity here for a reason, is I want to do a lot of things that I suppose would be associated with masculinity, say being exercise, being strong, being able to self-defend or whatever, precisely so that I don't have experience of inadequacy that makes me reflect on masculinity. I want to make it disappear in a certain success of it, right? And another example is like, I always think it's important to be able to like entertain children without toys or whatever. Like, let me explain it. Like, I call it the unarmored test based on Owen and his work. And it's the idea that very often we kind of go, you know, we can deal with our problems with technology. So let me put it this way. You know, there could be a circumstance where you're with people and there's no TV. Okay. There's no technology. Are you able to make time feel full then? Are you able to make it an energetic situation? Or because there's not a TV, it's boring and it's a bad experience, right? Well, that means you failed the unarmored test because you don't have the thing. You need something to be there as a man in order to make it be a good time, right? Or let's say alcohol. If there's no alcohol, it's not much fun to be there, right? Well, you failed the unarmored test because you needed an armor. You needed something there in order to make the environment well. Well, why not instead learn or get really good at the skill of storytelling or the skill of conversation so that if there's not alcohol there, you're able to make it a good time because you've learned how to tell jokes. You've learned how to do things without a tool, if you will, like if you're naked in the wilderness in a certain sense, right? Maybe there is alcohol and maybe there are tools. That's perfectly fine. But what if there's a situation where there's not? Well, that's when you're going to reflect on yourself and think about how much of a failure you are. And now masculinity has become conscious to you. Well, that means you failed. In a very weird way, when you start thinking about masculinity, there's a way, for me at least, there's a way in which you have failed in masculinity because you have lacked something that you should have in order to not think about it. But that's very different from wanting to learn how to use a handsaw or whatever in order to be a man. No, I want to learn how to use a handsaw to not think about being a man, to go through the day where I'm more embedded in the environment, right? Like I want to learn how to wrestle so that when I fight someone or something comes up or the kids want to play, I'm not thinking about masculinity. This is a weird thing. You want to be good at wrestling so that you're just wrestling. Not that I'm being a man, but so that you're wrestling. Do you understand? Like you're actually in the thing then, right? And this is the reason why I bring all this up is because for me, it is only in that saturation, to use Ebert's term, or self-forgetfulness, that then I actually think we are the kinds of beings of whom can answer the question, what is a man? Because that is the condition where it can surprise you. That's where it can unveil it versus you decide. Because in that kind of self-forgetfulness, where you're just trying to be excellent, to just be in life, then whatever it means to be a man can appear in the model of your life, like a description, like a work of art, like something that is experienced, right? And I think the same applies when it comes to what does it mean to have community? Like, what does it mean to have, Christianity? All of these things you need to approach in doing things excellently so that you can have a certain self-forgetfulness in them, a certain kind of flow, a certain in them. So then the answer to those inquiries can emerge, can appear, can manifest, right? And so to me, and then I'll stop. Whenever we have these questions of like these weird questions, and it's not all questions, but I think it's basically all the most important questions, especially today. These questions that seem if we answer them, we do something wrong. But then it also seems to be a problem that if we just forget about them or do nothing regarding them, there's a problem. To me, basically, there's some sort of unarmored test that is needed. There is some sort of mastering of some skills and abilities to have a self-forgetfulness. And then in that state of flow, I think what you're saying, Aspasia, the biological realities unveil themselves then. Because like they for the like whatever the biology of male is will appear, right? It will manifest female, and so on. And so then in the muddle of our lives, in that self-forgetfulness, the question is answered simply because we have worked in such a way to not think about it, but to instead be the conditions of possibility of the answer's emergence. And that is basically a framework. I think it's no different. Like what I'm describing to me is like why you have to have the social coordination mechanism, is because you forget things, you're in conversations and the answers emerge. Like that kind of basically onto epistemological method, to use a mouth phrase, that like you're using your entire being to answer questions by being a condition for the answer to kind of manifest as art or manifest in a life. And then you see that and you can represent that. I think also I'll stop with that.
Well, I can definitely relate to the idea of something like masculinity being more prominent as a test that if I fail it, it kind of haunts me, you know? And like, it's funny, even to be here on this podcast, just exploring whatever comes up with you, if I made more money and if I was better at fixing things and like a few other things I could list, I might feel like I was more worthy of being on this podcast to talk about whatever, you know, not those categories. But there's a danger that, you know, if I haven't taken care of those other things, well, what am I doing here anyway? Because you haven't taken care of those other things. And Aspasia can chime in. Obviously, I don't want to speak for women here, but I think that also we're in an age where, because definitions are so much up for grabs at this point, and because of the climate crisis and because of the political crises and the economic situation and just the whole sense of what the hell's supposed to happen next, I think there is almost an existential awareness of the need for creativity. But who has the right to be creative? Are we going to follow the people who haven't yet proven their manliness or their womanliness? Or, you know, because it could be, I mean, I know I'm thinking of Daniel, you'll sometimes talk about neurodivergence, right? As potentially, you know, I mean, the neurodivergent, just broadly speaking, are largely not given a place in society. And yet their different experience, their different way of seeing and thinking might well produce possibilities, you know, that no one else would come up with. And I think there's a sort of a general sense of like, well, what do we do if everything we've been doing has brought us here? We're going to have to do something new. And so I think it's, I mean, I just find myself thinking about these questions all the time. You know, it doesn't mean that I think that I'm the one who's got the answers, but maybe it's just because I'm alive on planet Earth in 2026 and I'm watching stuff fall apart. And I'm like, is making money the most important thing? And yet I do have to pay the rent. So, but I can't help that the kinds of things that we talk about here, actually, they're in my head, like whether I like it or not. I mean, there's ways that the, let's say, non-traditional paths I've taken, I can think about them in terms of, yeah, well, I was drawn to that. But yeah, there's a way that I don't know. I think some of these traditional definitions, yeah, I just want to resonate with what you said. It's like I'd like to have that out of the way, but then once I have it out of the way, it's not like I would want to keep building on, you know, on these sort of traditional definitions. I could care less, you know, if I meet every person's definition of a man, but if I keep running into the feeling of not measuring up, it becomes this noise, it becomes this distraction. But, you know, I think all of those definitions, you were saying something in our previous conversation, Daniel, about deconstruction, but there's like an impulse to deconstruct. I think it's just in us, living in this day and age. But yeah, we have to get to the place where we start to put things back together again. And yeah, I wonder, I mean, are some of the so-called uninitiated men, there's enough of them or us, I might say. I mean, it's funny, if I look at my life, there's things I've done that took me outside of my comfort zone, that tested me, but there wasn't necessarily someone guiding me through it and like talking to me about it and saying, look, now you've arrived to this new place and this is what this means, and like now we're gonna, now everyone can see that you've been through this particular initiation. I mean, I think there's all kinds of sort of initiations that life will offer you, but if we don't have a shared experience of being initiated, or if we don't have a way of demonstrating that we are initiated that can be clearly seen by all, then the capacity to move into something new and something creative that might change up the old definitions, it's it's difficult. And it is interesting to feel that, like, so I also mentioned before, and this was very much a result of being in this sphere of going to this men's retreat, and we had a martial arts workshop and we were wrestling, and I kind of had a sense of like my size, and I can remember some tussles as a kid. I took a few months of Aikido before the pandemic, but I kind of had never tested myself, right? And so then it was like, all right, two men go in the middle, and like, who pushes the other guy out? And I actually got to see what happened. Like it was clear that one man stayed in the circle and the other one didn't. But so I did that, and then I came home and I was kind of I was feeling something new. So I've started taking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and like Daniel, I hope that I don't have to use it. I hope. But there's something about that struggle. It's like when I leave the class, I'm like, oh, I know what that's like, and I've been through some of that. I'm almost cracking up at sort of listening to myself talk, just imagining someone who's been in these situations, or whose life put them in these situations for years, how this must sound to them. I mean, I feel almost a little embarrassed, to say it this way, but it's like there is nothing that replaces experience, right? So to actually wrestle, to actually have someone take you down, it does leave me, after even just these few classes I've taken, I walk out and there's a certain difference in the posture, that it's kind of like, well, I did that, and therefore I don't know, I think there's like an internal, I mean, there's what people think, but we also have to prove ourselves to ourselves, right? I have to actually believe that I can accomplish things in order to set myself a new task. And if I'm going to set myself a task that I've never done before, again, I have to have a certain kind of and so I think that takes us back to something, you can call it traditional, or maybe you can call it archetypal, but there is nothing that replaces, for example, for a man, the sense of, I know how to physically defend myself, or I could, you simply cannot replace that, no matter how much the world is changing and things are shifting. So, I mean, what's interesting to me is, they're really like as opposed to what Daniel often talk about, how people sort of nostalgically go to the past and they want to just like get rid of difference and let me be around people just like me, and now I feel at home, and how that can be regressive. But there are some things that I think, if you just look through human history, that have always been done, that we've lost very much to our detriment. and can we recover them without necessarily feeling trapped in old definitions? But there's something more like energies we're talking about here with masculine and feminine. So yeah, well, I'll stop here for now.
I thought that was really vulnerable and beautiful and powerful, Seth. Yeah, to share that. And I woke up in a new way with you sharing that. So I appreciate it. I was thinking as you were saying all of that, again, just sort of about, well, I really picked up on when you were talking about making money. And then you also led on to, obviously, the wrestling and the fighting and being able to physically defend yourself. And obviously not just yourself, but the way that links to physically defending then if you have a family or a partner and, all these things. And I guess I was honed in on, I've heard this a lot. I've heard this so much from men, this about the making money, like the pressure to be making money and just making that such a firm focus, and how one's sense of masculinity can fall away, right, based on that metric. And it's not, to me, that's one of these things. It's a very clear indicator of a difference for me, right? I can't relate. So I can relate, obviously, to there's an importance to making a certain level of money, right? So that my family can exist. But sort of, it's very clear to me that kind of feeling that you're describing is very much like something about the experience of men that I won't understand. There's some additional layer to it that it doesn't, I can't resonate with. And I feel that from the way that men talk about it. And I was thinking about that, and then you're talking obviously about physical defense. There's something in all of this, I think, about like what it is to feel powerful and valuable to the other sex. What is it to feel that you are contributing or doing something that is sort of makes up for what the other, kind of like the complementary kind of thing. And again, I know this sounds very reductionistic and basic, but I really do think that for women, and not for all women, we're using kind of fuzzy categories here, but like for women in a general sense, there is a capacity to grow a child. And I think that is something that is very clearly a contribution and a very powerful act, and can be very valuable, that is, and very clear that men can't do, right? And so obviously that though then comes with, like you're talking about the making money, that comes with a whole set of pressures for women. So I'm not implying that it's that, but I want to set that aside for a minute because it's not the point I'm making. I just think that as an example, that's something that women almost have, most women, not all women, most women sort of have inbuilt in them as a capacity. It's there, and even in an unconscious sense is seen as quite valuable, and it feels like a powerful act. It's a powerful contribution to something, and I just think about how even though society has changed in so many ways, that remains the same. If I keep going back to this point, and again, my mind just goes to for men, they don't have that, and so it's much, some of these more I don't really know what I'm trying to say. I'm just relating those two things in some way. It's like what essentially I guess it's sort of around, the question becomes one of where is it that men are finding their sense of worth and value, and I do think powerful is an important word in all of this, and I know that it's got lots of other connotations to it, the word power, but I think it's important for both sexes to feel that they are powerful in their own way, and yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there. Like I'm just thinking too, like as an example, I don't really know if it fits in, but so like when I was younger, I was very close to my dad, and I had an older brother, and I would spend my time, a lot with them, and I was like what you would call now like a tomboy, like I was out doing boys stuff, And I was outdoors and I was out in the bush and I was underwater and I was, and I was like, doing some of these things, like, learning to do the skills that might be more traditionally masculine. And so, I mean, there's a lot I could say about that and how that links to then a sense of femininity and all those things. But there is something about the biology that kind of carried me more naturally, maybe sort of just out of that, not out of it completely, but sort of carried me into, or maybe just brought in a sense of femininity and being a woman as well. That I didn't necessarily have to work on or work at, if that makes sense. There is something biologically. Now, that's not to say that that's perfect. There's a lot I could say on all of that. But there is some sort of lopsidedness, I think, is what I'm continuously trying to point to here. That it does sound like for men, what I'm hearing is that there is just a lot more of a clearing and a lot more of a, needing to go and purposely learn these skills and go in and train and do all these things. And some of that for women, it's not like that. And again, if I just go back to growing a baby, which I know I keep saying, but I think it's a good example of this, once again, and not to say that it's an easy experience, it takes a massive toll on a woman. But again, you're not actually really doing anything. The process is taking place, right? And and again, I don't want that to sound like it's, you know what I mean? You're not having to sort of turn up every day and and attend to going to the class, and it's just growing, and it comes with all its challenges. But there is something to, I don't know, like a steadfastness, like for men, a kind of like sticking at something longer over time, or I don't know what I'm trying to get to here, but the making money one just really stands out to me, like just the level of pressure that I hear when men talk about that seems very different. And there is, for women, there are a lot of women out there that are like very, very focused on making as much money as they can, and purposely so, because they don't ever want to be dependent on a man, and and there's a whole sort of subculture around all that, and so, it's, again, I'm not trying to imply that there aren't lots of women that are very focused on making money and feel lots of pressure around that. And they also have anxieties and fears about what's going to happen if they don't make more and more and more. But it's still at its root, when I work with women who are facing that sort of thing, it's still, again, same words on top, like crushing pressure of needing to make money. But underneath, the experience feels very different if I'm working with a woman around that versus a man. One feels much more existential, like an archetypal for men. It's almost like ground level manhood, and for women, it's often more just sort of like fear of having to rely on a man. I don't know. There you go. There's some stuff. I'm going to put these on for a moment because I just feel like I bumbled a whole lot of like nonsense out into the field, and now I feel slightly embarrassed. So Seth stayed with his embarrassment. I'm going to hide behind these.
I didn't think you bumbled at all, and that's not hiding. That's bringing out the wonder of the moment. No, I didn't. I think that was all just very important. I'm very what you were saying about contribution, like feeling like the man contributes, like and how there perhaps it is easier for the woman to feel like they've contributed because there's a child, right? This is very interesting, and it does raise the question on what happens when you feel like you've contributed. Like, what do you experience yourself doing? What do you experience yourself doing through the eyes of another? Because we don't just see other people, we also see ourselves through other people. Like, we're imagining what they see of us, and we're seeing ourselves. There's all these kind of meta layers going on, for good and for bad, for good and for bad. And what occurs when we genuinely believe that we have contributed? Like, what are the conditions met that make you go, I have contributed, right? And perhaps if you could answer that, then the question of what is the male, what is the female would, in a sense, answer itself, right? Like, if you actually would say, oh, I have contributed, therefore, I have been a man, I've been a woman. It almost like takes care of itself in a certain way. It is also interesting to ask, what is it that makes one feel powerful? Like when you feel powerful in the way you're describing, what are the conditions met that make you feel powerful? And it would seem as if there's something about contribution and power that are tied together in this way, right? Um, there is also something, I think, what you're saying with men with money, where they feel as if they're not making the money, they're not contributing. Like it's just flat out, they're not contributing, therefore they're not powerful, therefore they're not men. Because it is interesting to think a lack of contribution, a lack of power equals a lack of manhood and or femininity, et cetera, so forth, right? Um, but then, of course, in the same way, if if a woman, like in the sense on the flip side, the woman might have it easier to feel like they've contributed, but then they may also, you know, become the devouring mother if they don't do the differentiation from the contribution, because in all of that, right? So there's all of those tensions between chosen and enough choice to feel like the chosen is not oppressive, or you have no individuation of it. So it is interesting to think of the contribution. Now, again, perhaps it could be said that it was easier for the male to feel like they contributed when they went and got food and brought it back, or, you know, hunter-gatherer kind of thing. Well, we definitely have meaningfully contributed because we're not starving to death, right? As a generality, right? That's a meaningful contribution because we see, or when you fight off the invading army because we're not all dead. Therefore, meaningful contribution. And perhaps the existential feeling of money is a hangover from go get the food, go keep out the bad, go find what is needed and bring back what is needed, right? Kind of on a very kind of simplistic level. But what does it mean to contribute when it is not, when you don't because there's a way in which is what is being said, or a way to take what is being said, is it is easier to determine how to contribute when there's a way in which biology does some degree of the defining of what you need to do, right? Like if we're going to starve to death, then contribution equals getting food, right? If you know, if the human race will no longer exist if we don't have babies, then having babies is to contribute, right? But what does it mean in an age when technology is doing a lot of the biological contributions that the male would have done? Because there's a way in which technology is stepping in for men. Like that's kind of a lot of the issue. And we don't have a situation where technology is able to have babies yet, like artificial wombs and things, but that could occur, right? And it also depends. And birth control, you get all those questions, right? But there's a way in which technology um, forces the question of contribution, like when technology kind of steps in, right? So what does it mean for me to feel like you contribute, right? Like when do I feel like I've contributed? Or when do I feel like this relationship or marriage with Michelle, when do I feel like that it has done something that, if not just contributes to us, but contributes almost to the texture of reality? Like this is what humans are supposed to do in creation. This is what humans are supposed to do that adds almost to the melody of being. To, you know, there's a kind of way that when you feel like you're doing what you're supposed to do, you're somehow cosmically aligned, almost like alignment with being in the classical sense, right? And there's a way in which you feel like you're contributing because you're living life like it is supposed to live, and therefore participating in a realization of the fullness of life. And that very modeling and choices, and the thunderstorm is about to be here, is actually in some sort of sense a contribution, right? Like for me, and it came up earlier, like I feel like I have contributed to a situation if we're not stuck in an enclosure. Like we're stuck in a self-relating like logic that we can't get out of. The energy drains out, everyone feels sad, you just kind of feel hopeless and things kind of go away. The energy is drained out, right? Like if you kind of break out of that, that's a contribution, right? If you are able to contribute to a space that feels like it increases the energy, like there's an energetic contribution because things are able to flow, right? If you're able to contribute because you're actually able to basically de-escalate situations between children, or if you're able to actually help people or children become more of themselves, that you don't know what they are ahead of time, but that there's some sort of contribution of that surprise occurring, right? I do think there's a way in which we're now dealing with kind of almost the movement from biologic, a focus on like I think we're in a certain transition, I guess I want to say, and we have to choose if technology is going to do it. Like as the field of biological limitation recedes, then the clarity of contribution goes away. Okay. And for men, I think it's gone away quicker than for women, is what I want to say. Like the contributions technology has taken it from men before it's taken it for women. Now it's coming for women. It's coming, but it's taking it from men. Okay. So men are kind of in a way, a window in where women may be going if technology can, innovations are possible, right? So in that kind of, and so you could say the crisis, the meta crisis in that sense, that kind of open clearing of what does it mean to contribute meaningfully is perhaps hitting men first. Maybe that's why men go into philosophy and theology and these sort of questions. But I think women are coming. I think they're increasingly coming, is because that question of contribution is high and how to do it, right? And I think technology has a lot to do with it. But what I guess I'm saying is that we're in the middle of a kind of, let me put it this way. There's a way in which our historic moment is where biology as the source of clarity of contribution is ending. And as it ends, because of technology, either technology will just continue to do it. It will take care of all the contributions that men could do, and then even eventually women. And so there is no human contribution. Or we're going to figure out how to contribute spiritually. Like we're going to contribute in a more mental, spiritual, energetic way, right? We have to think about like energetic contribution. But of course, that gets into what we were talking about earlier, where you have to like live discern situations and live discern people's kind of emotional state and live discern your own state. And that kind of more fuzzy environment has to be what you're good at having a sense of, a flavor of, a taste of, and then determining contribution in light of that. And I call that meta judgment, like the ability to, like you're able to kind of judge how you judge or what kind of judge you should do, or discernment, if you want a different term. But we have to be kind of aware of invisible dynamics that are not completely obvious, and getting good at that kind of fuzzy stuff is how we're going to regain a sense of contribution. Because it really does matter, because it changes the energy in the room. It decides if families are always fighting. It saves marriage. It changes everything. It decides if nations are stuck in violence forever. I mean, it really, really, really does matter. And we're kind of like, I guess we were talking earlier about questions that we have to hold open. I think now we have to think contribution as in contributing to the effort to hold the questions open so that the address can emerge on its own, right? And the need for that increases to the proportion that technology takes care of, removes biological restraint in a certain way, removes biological determinations or, the determinations of nature, right? There was a time in which we couldn't fly. That was a limit, right? And so a contribution would have been many things that had to be done that were hard to do, perhaps travel, because we didn't have flight, right? But now that you have flight, all of those methods of contribution go away because it's easier to travel. You don't need all the roadsmen or whatever, right? So technology kind of makes it harder to figure out how to contribute. But I think the field now by which we can think it is going to be dealing more with the spiritual. And if we don't figure out how to contribute in that way, then basically technology will replace us because it will simply remove all the means by which we can contribute, and we won't have anything to fill the space.
I just really briefly wanted to say that there's, and then I'll pass it to you, Seth. There's something, again, really important about the body, especially as we bring in the biology stuff here. I was just thinking it's very interesting, like you were giving that example, Seth, of taking up jujitsu now. And I think, I'm guessing from sort of how you're speaking about it, you're enjoying that, like that feels, yeah. Maybe eventually you're unfolding into an enjoyment of it at some point. There's something about like returning to our bodies and what they're capable of, and that is different for men and women, broadly speaking. And I don't know, just tuning into that and honing into that just for the sake of that, which I think sounds like it can be really important here too. And what I mean by that is that there may be no real need in your life or anyone's life, Seth, to actually learn jujitsu, and for many people, there may be no need to ever work on any kind of ability to fight or to wrestle or to do anything like that. But the purposefully engaging in those things, those activities anyway, There's something, it brings something else with it as well. So it's not, I guess I'm just pointing to sort of like, it's kind of like the surprise thing. It's not, it doesn't necessarily follow that you know the outcome of these activities ahead of time, but there is something about the calling, the feeling called to them, right? There's something about actually, I want to engage more with the physicality of my body as a man or whatever it is. There's something about that you can't know where that's going to lead necessarily. Whereas I think it used to be quite obvious that, well, obviously that's going to help me to, you know, go out and fight and defend and all these things. Whereas nowadays it's not so obvious you're ever actually going to have to do that. But there's still something that sounds incredibly important about the living in a body where you're aware that that is available to you, perhaps as a man, if needed, that does something else about your experience day to day in the world. Yeah, throw that in there.
I like this word contribution because I think it's a feeling. I made a contribution. That's a palpable feeling. That there's something in that feeling that is it's like a somatic experience of dignity. You know, it's like I can just be okay. I no longer need to prove myself. And thinking again about initiation, I mean, it's funny, you know, so the example of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that's not an initiation rite. But if I go into class and the one guy's trying to choke me and I'm trying to choke him, and we both know that if it feels like, you know, I can't breathe, we're going to just tap the other guy on the arm and everyone's going to like, that's it, you know, like, well, like they said on the first day, or the other thing you do is you get someone's arm and you show them, I could break your arm. But as they say, no one wants to break anyone's arm here. No one wants to get their arm broken. Everyone here is nice. But the funny thing is, like, so I think what I could say, though, maybe it's a stretch because they're not the same. But what this class is, and maybe what it's a gap that it's filling for me, is it is something like a crucible. It's like, have you spent time in the crucible? And the thing is, you know, this, I was also thinking about the word failure. You know, failure means you attempted to do something and you didn't succeed. However, if you have a mentor, every time you don't succeed, it just becomes the opportunity to talk, you know, for learning. I mean, how do you become a master at anything without repeatedly failing to do the thing, right? But when you do it alone, you don't have the encouragement to do it a second time, a third time, a 100th time. I mean, people will have different levels of sort of, you know, bootstrapping themselves forward. But at a certain point, to have someone who knows how to do the thing that I can't yet do, to say, here's where you went wrong, or, you know, I can tell you're going to get this soon because you're making progress every day, or whatever they say, it's entirely different. And yeah, there's this thing about technology taking things away. I mean, what's that movie, Wall-E, where the robot is left on Earth? But it's like it's this futuristic, and humans have trashed the Earth, but you know, they escape on a spaceship and then they're in outer space. And what are they doing? They're doing absolutely nothing. It's just pure, they're being entertained. Like they all have Slurpees and they have screens and like this kind of thing. But I mean, okay, so it's incredible what technology has done, but if it takes away all of our sense of contribution, you know, then what kind of future is that? Of course, we can all imagine that, you know, there's all kinds of beautiful things that human culture has done that would flourish, but there would have to be some sort of preservation of spirit, some sort of preservation of our energy, of the feeling of community, or the feeling of, yeah, I think even if I imagine, that technology kind of takes care that we're all going to be fed, and that kind of thing, it's funny. I just go to, like, well, then we're going to need elders, and then we're going to need ceremony, and then we're going to need these things, because how else would we have a sense of who we are or what we're doing here? I mean, I'm happy to be entertained on a weekend, but to just be entertained for the rest of my life, that sounds like hell, actually. Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, there is a sort of I guess the other thing that's just coming to mind is like the temptation to say that the experience we're having right now is a mistake. Maybe this is a crucible that humanity is passing through, and maybe there is something. I mean, it seems to me, if we do imagine that we get to the other side of the current state of the world and we don't blow everything up, I think masculinity and femininity will be redefined, or maybe not redefined, but reclarified, because they are two different energies that, every spiritual tradition talks about how they work in harmony. The union of those two energies is the source of everything we know. But it's like that is something that is, no matter how innovative and modern we get, I don't think you can modernize that. I think that there's something there that is, and it's funny for me. I mean, I'm kind of like, as I take up these questions at this point in my life, I'm kind of shocked that it never occurred to me to do so sooner. But I kind of think that these are vital questions, for all of us, increasingly so.
I was thinking about the language of I know I was talking before about feeling powerful or valuable, but as we're talking about contribution, and you were fleshing that out there, Seth, I was thinking it's really more like an active and passive thing. And actually, I think we all yearn to feel that we are stepping in and out of both of those. Like that is part of the contribution is, you might be in the more active, right? But then you also make a contribution to the other by stepping back and allowing them to be active, right? So like we can call that kind of active and passive. But it's the interplay between the two, and oftentimes masculinity gets talked about as active and femininity as passive, but I just think that I don't think that's quite right. I think that there is a way that within the strain of femininity there is an activeness, and then there is a passivity or a passiveness. I think there's a way that right, and obviously the same with men. And now maybe it's anyway. So I was thinking that, and I was just thinking about how this kind of all circles back to love, and to the experience of needing both the feeling loved, and the being able to love, like how vitally important that is to a person's well-being, overall. That both things, that there are both things, but to do that, you have to be able to step back and make the space for the other. And then you have to be able to step onto the stage and do the more active and the things. So that's it. I just wanted to. I think there's something here about that's part of what you're saying there too, Seth.
No, outstanding, and I completely agree with what you're saying on there being something very problematic about these various dichotomies, active, passive, et cetera, so forth. Generally, a way, because male and female are geometrical versus algebraic, the issue is that there is a unique unfolding of passive and active elements in the male, and a unique unfolding of passive and active elements in the female, and that the unfoldings entail all parts of both parts of the dichotomy, but the quality of the unfolding is unique for the male, for the feminine, right? But you can't know what that is except in its unfolding and unveiling it to you and in the experience of it. And it can vary from Aspasia to Michelle to Sarah to whoever, Daniel, Seth, like it can have a one of oneness. The other issue is like to the question of what is the male, the answer could be 300 million. Like each individual male as a white stone name, one of one, can be, this is a painting of masculinity and male. Because also, like, what is masculinity versus male? Like, this is one manifestation of it. This is a second man unfolding. This is a third unfolding, and that each unfolding is another creative possibility to fill, creation with all of these constellations. I think I wanted to say, when Seth was saying that really important idea on, like, there's this tradition, ancient tradition, that male and female together bring different energies, right? Like that together they're able to do something. One of the reasons I think basically why we're so stuck in these definitions of male and female and does it exist or not is because we've lost the art of how to bring about that energy. So we don't experience the unique energy that males and females bring out together. And therefore we're stuck talking about definitions, because if you the energy, you wouldn't have the conversation. Well, of course, you would just know it. Like you don't need, it's like jumping in water. If you jumped in the water, then you don't so much need the definition of what is water in a certain way, right? Because you have the experience. Like one of the reasons why I think we're struggling with this topic is because we don't in the modern world, and maybe we never had it. That could be an argument. And we're recovering something we never had, or maybe this is the age we first find it out. But at the very least, it can be said that there has been traditions that has spoken about a certain energy that arises when males and females are together, thanks to each of the parts, that is important. Now, whether you buy that or not, what I am suggesting is that if we're in an age where people don't experience that energy, well, then we're just talking definitions then, because we don't have the way of jumping in the water. So then we have to just have a definition of what is water. Like imagine you didn't have any way to jump into water. Then the only way to know what water was to have definitions or somebody tell you what it was, right? So there's something about that problem that's happening with the male and female issue. Like we don't actually know the art anymore, or we need to learn the art of the energy that is uniquely afforded by the feminine and the masculine. That if we don't have that energy, we can't know what the male and female is, because you don't have the clearing. And then the question answers itself, because you have the experience of the energy, right? So because we don't have the experience of the energy, then we have to try to answer this question with definitions. And then it's not plausible to us that trying to answer this question can do anything but oppress. Because in a way, it seems like all it can do is limit, right? Because someone's going to decide it's this versus that, or this. Some person will say this is the best way to open the question, and another person will say this is the best way to open the question. It seems like it's all risk without any gain, right? But then if you had the experience of the energy, and that was to bring out a certain quality of life you didn't have, you say, oh, the risk is worth it, because that quality of energy is so magnificent, so beautiful, so joyful, that's worth it. And until we become a people of whom can actually create that energy that is unique in the metaxis, in the relationship of male and female, which I would argue the traditions also say requires the male to fully realize malehood, feminine to fully realize feminine, to bring out this energy that can only come out between. If you can't have that energetic feeling, then this conversation will just seem like all risk without any potential gain, and it won't seem worth it, and we'll just be stuck in definition. So there's an energy that has to occur. I think traditions also called that love, but they meant it in a much more cosmic way. They meant it in a much kind of more higher way. I think love was this idea that you loved your life, and you felt like time was timeless, and you didn't want anywhere else you wanted to go, and everything had a certain artfulness to it, right? Like the female steps in at the right moment, and the male steps in at the right moment, and they say this, and there's a dance. I think you can't define male and female without the dance, the experience of the dance. Like what those things are is the steps in the dance that has to be experienced energetically, and we just don't know how to do that. We've lost religion, we've lost rituals, et cetera, so forth, but without that experience, we're just not going to believe these questions are worth even taking on. And we're going to just let technology take it away from us, because that's what's going to happen. Like, these questions are going to be too burdensome to us. It's not going to be like, what is male? What is female? I don't know. If I say this, it pisses off a bunch of people and I seem like I'm limiting. I don't know. I don't even want to think about it. Oh, technology will step in and do like all the female stuff and the male stuff. Let it. Technology will just kind of remove it from us, right? And if we've never had, it will at least practically remove it from us. Not technically, but practically, okay? So, but if we've never had the experience of the unique energy that masculinity and femininity together can make, which I think is tied to the art of living in the Iliac sense, like beauty and so forth, then we don't feel like we're losing anything. Like, if technology feels it, like, we're not losing anything, because we haven't had that unique experience of the energy. We haven't had that unique experience of the dwelling. And so it will, in our minds, to hand the stuff all over to technology is pure gain, no loss. It's going to be pure gain and no loss. And that's when you're really damned. When you experience the enclosure as pure gain and no loss, because you never tasted the energetic possibilities in the relationship, then you're gonna be truly ignorant. You're not gonna know what you don't know. So I think there's something now, and I'll stop. Like, we have to regain the art of bringing out the energy that only the masculine and feminine together can bring out. And I do think that is an energy that overcomes game theory problems. It overcomes suboptimal results. I think it is fundamentally menti-divergent. It has a neurodivergent kind of sense to it. It's a way of thinking that is not neurotypical, that gets us through rational impasses, as I like to call them, and also makes us feel like we're actually living, dang it. And I think, like, kind of a Manhattan Project of figuring that out is a big deal. And I think it's tied to the social coordination mechanism.
Really not much to say, but I was thinking as you were laying all that out, about how that definition, right, of a man as a human being with a penis, or born with a penis, I should say, right? Just as that, as much as that pisses people off, right? Lots of people. And as much as that might sound really, on its face, like quite reductionistic or rigid, or I'm not quite sure exactly what the words are, or limiting, I actually think it's sort of, there's a way you could look at that is really just an attempt to give something quite basic, therefore to leave the room for all the variation beyond that. Like, that's all, it's sort of like that's all it's saying, as opposed to, like, purposefully all it's saying, as opposed to it's saying something that then people jump on as, well, what about all the people that cuts out of the equation? And you know what I'm getting at. No eloquence today, but that's I've often thought that about when people express, what a man and a woman is in those terms. I've often kind of thought that and thought, okay, well, but I see how much anger it generates in other people to hear that, but in my mind, it's sort of like, well, but there's so much openness that's then available there. We're kind of just like something to start with. And I do also think, while we're saying things that are going to piss people off, I do also think there's something to, and again, there's a fuzziness to it, because that's not to say that there wouldn't be scenarios in which, maybe that definition falls apart, or whatever. But just kind of as an overview. But there's something about that too, because there's also the emphasis on how a child is born, right, as opposed to saying it is a human being with a penis. It's more like it's someone who was born with one, because I think actually, once again, that can piss a lot of people off. But I think that for some people, in taking that approach, there is an attempt to also take into account the socialization aspect that goes on, what it means to have had an experience of a lifetime, a childhood, where you were treated as such, you were treated in the category of man, boy, we could say. So it takes that into account, which is often why they talk about from birth. Whereas, yeah, I don't know. Whereas I think I can also understand, though, on the other end of the spectrum, why that would piss some people off as well. I don't want to imply I don't understand that. But there is something in all of this about how on earth do we use any words at all then, right? How on earth can we use any words at all to do anything? Because yeah, I agree with everything you were laying out there, Daniel. This is essentially all about experiencing the dance yourself, and actually you as more and more time goes on, the longer the dance goes on for. And so the more that you gather and understand and incorporate into whatever that understanding is, and the more you build that out, and the richer your experience becomes. But then you can't write a little definition, and then, you know, then people get pissed off. So yeah, that's all.
Just as a very quick note, I think so. Man is someone with a penis, that can be restricted because they think you have that as a ceiling versus a ground, right? But also, furthermore, I think people, especially let me just say in modernity, they feel as if, so sometimes in the literature, like Simile, et cetera, they'll make a difference, and you already have, between, say, male and masculine, for example. And they can say, yes, male is biology, penis, but masculine is a social categorization, and we should kind of be free from that, right? Well, I think there's a feeling today where people actually feel like the pressures of socialization or the social order are so constricting on the female in the male that basically our only hope for diversity is to actually expand the male definition, not the masculine, right? But I would argue that is a response to feeling like we're no longer able to think creatively in the masculine, right? And that just gets into be where we've been habituated and say only into pragmatism. That's like a value form, like logic problem, right? Like, so I think I just want to say that I think a lot of the kind of turn on trying to diversify on the male level versus the masculine level is in response to a feeling that kind of the incubation of the social order makes it basically impossible to have a great diversity of what it is to be masculine. So then we're just going to freak, because then therefore our only hope is to deconstruct the male and get rid of it, and then creativity will explode, right? When actually what you need is a diversity of medium forms in the society to open up different value forms, different logics, different ways of thinking, right? And then the biological will be experienced more as a ground than as a ceiling. So just as a comment.
That was incredibly well said and clarifying for me. I felt like in that moment, and this is the illustration of the dance between the masculine and feminine, perhaps. In that moment, you took a cloud of something in my head that I was but really that I was trying to like put words to, and then you set it back and added in extra stuff in a way that brought this beautiful order to it. And resonated deeply, right? And helped me to understand something that I was already trying to put words to, right, much more clearly. Now, some people, again, if we're talking about pissing people off, some people might look at something like that and call that mansplaining or put some sort of label on that or something, right, and try and denigrate it. But like my experience of that is it's like a dance. It's such a beautiful thing. That's why I turn up to these conversations. I experience this as there are the parts that each of us can contribute in that way, right? This is the dance. This is the energetic dance. And I just really wanted to highlight that because it just like happened in real time there. And it was a beautiful thing.
That's one more quick thing, but that is because you're letting the energy decide what happened, not definitions.
Yes.
Because if you let definitions, you say, oh, that's mansplaining, right? But if you say energetically, you say, no, that's not mansplaining. But that's why we have to pay attention to energy to determine what labels or words applied to describe the situation versus have preset words that we say, well, that's what that was because I saw it. I saw the male talk after the female, therefore mansplaining, right? But that means we have to learn to we have to sense energy and have the energy define what occurred. Like the energy unveils to us what happened, as opposed to us label what happened based on what we see. But that also means only the people in the interaction can determine the truth of it because they're the ones feeling the energy. But we have for too long decided our labels based on the accidents of experience, if you will, as opposed to have it be in accordance with the energy we experience. And that's part of recovering the art of living and that particular energy that is only afforded between the masculine and the feminine.
Yes. And it's a much more vulnerable position to put oneself in, to rely on the energetics of one's experience, and to then also, I should say, talk about it in a place where we know it's being recorded and is going to go online, and there's going to just be like, I was going to say like thousands of eyes, but let's be clear, maybe 100. Although hold on, each person has 2 eyeballs, so I can double the number. All right. all all these people watching, and and we all do it. I don't want to imply I don't do it sometimes. Watching something and being very quick to judgment about something they see. It's a much more vulnerable position to go with energetics. I love that. That's
Mhm. Well, just in that exchange between the two of you and sort of the way you said it, Aspasia, that you put something out that wasn't fully formed and you felt like Daniel gave it more form. But I think we need space for both of those experiences. And I think we, meaning both men and women, we need a place where we can play with something that isn't fully formed. And that's all right. And we also need to, I don't know if you call it the courage, but we need to sometimes be able to define a shape. But yeah, kind of like before you were talking about different versions of passive and active, there's a dialectic between the two, right? I spend time in a sort of liminal space where I don't know what's happening, but if I can be comfortable there, I can actually discover a definition. And I think, yeah, also I think that's kind of what Daniel was saying about like following the energy, because that's what's so interesting to me about these kinds of spaces. I mean, I can spend a lot of time in a space like this really wondering, where is this going, what's happening? But then when something coalesces, it does coalesce, and you can feel it, and then it's like, oh, I can do something with that. It's also funny because when the two of you went back and forth a couple of times, I kept thinking, oh, good, because I can't think of anything what to say. Oh, good. And then they, it's just, but it was almost, I was thinking, but it's, maybe they know that I don't have anything to say, which is why they keep the thing going, while I'm over here. But
we're just loving and caring for you, Seth. Loving and caring.
That's right. Well, and we need love and care sometimes when we actually are wounded or, just incapacitated in some way, or we don't know how to contribute. That there has to be space for that. But yeah, I am running I'm running out of things to say, but I guess just the sense that spending time in a place, yeah, like that metaphor of the dance, it's like I don't need to know all the dance steps if I have a partner, if I have partners in the dance, there is some kind of a flow. And then there'll be moments where maybe I have to take evasive action because I'm about to fall or something. But then there's other moments where suddenly I see this opportunity for something beautiful to happen, and that can happen as well. Yeah.
All I feel like doing is putting these glasses on. It's all I can think about. So, like, please talk, Daniel, while I just put glasses on and off.
Well, you can put on glasses whenever you want, Aspasia. Yeah, I guess the last thing I'm thinking about, as this apparently giant lightning storm is coming, I'm not sure, so I might vanish at any moment, is one, how much I appreciate both of you and always love these opportunities to get together. So thank you both for being you. I am also thinking that there is something about these questions like male, female, like that step in their kind of vehemence and kind of fear, because it's hard for people today feel like they can build something. Like, and what I mean by that is I think the question of male and female are easier to kind of have unveiled to you when you're building something together. And in an age where people feel like they don't have private property or they don't own things. And also, I really also always look to Ivan Illich. Like, if the man is spending a lot of the time out of the home making money and the woman is at home or vice versa or whatever, then they're in different worlds. And the stuff that they're both pouring into becomes alien to the other. And so it's hard to kind of have a feeling of how the male or the female uniquely contributes in a way that the other doesn't. And it's hard to get a kind of quality and texture of the uniqueness. And furthermore, it becomes harder to feel like you're building something together versus building something each at different shifts, if you will, right? And so I think like there's something also about the modern world that separates and segments and kind of makes it harder to therefore feel contribution together, and therefore according to a unique energy that everyone can bring. And when and dare I say, if the modern world takes that from you, all you have left is you're fighting over definitions, fighting over the meaning of these categories, which feels like an empowerment. But actually, that supposed empowerment is hiding from you that you've had the conditions of building something together taken from you. And you haven't even noticed because you feel like you're getting more money and you're building status and you're recognized. Like there is a way in which the modern world, and again, I'm generalizing, of course, but there is a sense where we had the spaces of building something together taken from us and replaced by status games. Like, and and in that game, you can't win. You're like, you're gonna lose, right? And it is interesting to see. For me, like, I definitely associate the social coordination mechanism with people like building something together again. Like we're trying to build something. Just even like Seth coming to the house, that is building something, right? You feel like you're building something. Like this space, you like even recording conversations and putting them on YouTube, you feel like you're building something. Humans perish without the feeling of building something. They perish without it because it's hard to feel like you had a real contribution unless it's building or compounding. Like that's why a child is important, because it's not merely the birth, it's the life. Like it's a compounding thing, right? Like it's kind of building. I think it is very hard for males to find this because often they work for someone else and don't own their work. And if they get fired, everything vanishes. They feel like basically the male, I think, has become so protective over money because that's all they have to show for all the different jobs they've done. They don't own any, they may not own anything. And if they do own something, if it's not energetically aligned or they're fighting just to keep it or whatever, that can be problematic. And this gets into a lot. And obviously, I'm kind of sounding Marxist here. But there's a certain way in which I think the problem is that in a world where it feels hard to build things, for the male, the thing they can build, the only thing they have to show that they've been building something is their money, right? Because even your skills feel like they're like, oh, you learn computer programming? Well, it's only useful if someone offers you the company where you can get a job computer programming, right? Unless you build your own thing, but then you get crowded out by Microsoft, right? So then the male can feel like they have all these different skills that can only be compounding to the degree they have a place they can plug it into, and then all they have to show for it is the money they make from it. So money becomes evidence of a building effort. And obviously it pays the bills, but I don't think you can explain the male's relationship to money purely in terms of paying the bills. It's evidence of a life. It's evidence of something building. It's evidence of something compounding. Because when somebody says to you they make $200,000, you subconsciously assume they built something or they're building up. They're going somewhere. If I say to you I have 10,000, you don't associate that with going somewhere. So the key to having money and status is trajectory. But that trajectory is a feeling of compounding. Do you see what I'm saying? Like it's building upon one another. And I do think generally because of pregnancy, it is easier for the woman to have an experience of a compounding contribution, something that is building upon one another, right? But you see, what we have to do is regain spaces together as male and female of compounding, of building together. And I think these online spaces can go a very long way. I think meeting people who then visit you on the farm, because now you have a shared history. This history feels like compounding. I think churches were generally spaces of feeling like a compounding because we come every week. I've been coming to this church for 40 years. I've seen all these people. There's that kind of feeling there. But then the social capital goes out and we're trying to kind of regain that because again, I think we will not feel like we contribute unless we feel like we're building together, unless we're building something that is greater than the sum of its parts and brings about a different energy. And the modern world has made it very, very difficult to do things that feel like you're building something together, that you're in a story. Figuring and that, like, you build to the degree you figure out the dance, you build to the degree you pay attention to the energetics, you build to the degree that you achieve excellence in things so that you can enter the self-forgetfulness that has the space kind of flow in a certain artful way. But I definitely think, I just want to stress, I think people's adamancy over definitions is compensation for the loss of spaces where they feel like they're building. Like, because you want to have something. If I'm gonna have something, dang it, and it's this definition. It is my definition of what a male is, my definition, and you're not going to take it from me, right? Because in a world where it feels hard to materially build something, well, you can't take my metaphysics. At least I have my categories, but that's just a compensation for a feeling like you have nothing else. And if people feel like they have nothing else, they're certainly not going to feel like they have something together and that they're building something together. And in that environment, we're just going to be lost in definitional disputes that feel like we're fighting for something that matters. But in the end, it doesn't build into anything at all.
And building is it's building, and it's also contribution to a lineage, to a tradition, to a, like, it's also the finding your ways to be connected to your roots, and not departing from all of that. Like they're being held by that as well, so that the thing that you are building is also connected to that which is already so much toil and time and energy has already been put into building, from which you can continue to build as well. Like there's that as well. So it's sort of, you know what I mean, like in a time direction, it goes in all directions.
And what is relationship without lineage? Like, what is relationship without building? It is not by chance that the loss of a feeling of building is a loss of relationship. And there's all this emphasis today on relationships, and relationships matter, and community, and et cetera, so forth. Well, if you don't have a feeling of building, then you don't have this sort of thing that is growing and compounding through time. The feeling of building and contribution and lineage and history and something emerging is necessary to feel like the relationship is real, substantive, there, something that is not just a nicety, but a necessity. Like this notion of contribution and building and relationship are two sides of the same coin. And if the modern world has made it very difficult to feel like you can build anything, then it's going to feel really hard to have relationships or know what relationships are even about. And then if people feel like they have to fight for if all they have is their categories and how they define things, well, then the only thing people can own is a certain activity that's antagonistic to relationships, because there's no building together, right? And so then we all atomize, individualize, and we don't build anything, which is hikikomori. And that, I think, so the fate, I don't think, like, there's a lot of talk of relational ontology, which Matt Segal is excellent on with Whitehead and different people. Like, there's this increasing revelation that relationships are ontological, right? But the key is, whatever is ontologically the case is not going to be of much importance to us unless you have daily practices that habituate you into alignment with that ontological actuality, right? And the modern world, economically, socially, et cetera, so forth, has basically made it very difficult to build. Therefore, to have a feeling of relationship that is actually relationship and alive through time. And therefore, we feel out of alignment with the ontological relationships of being, if you want to use that phrase, right? So basically, all of this is about, in a certain sense, alignment with actuality as relationship, as Trinity, as deepest sense. And that feeling, like I think Seth was saying about contribution, the feeling of contribution, I would align with the feeling of building, which is the feeling of relationship. There's also something about that feeling is the feeling of relationship. Because when you contribute, like, why do you feel like you've contributed? Is because you've actually put fertilizer, like you've given nutrients to the environment between you and other people. Like that place between you is alive and dynamic, and things that are occurring. So the feeling of contribution and the feeling of relationship go together. So if people don't feel like they contribute, they don't feel like relating. They don't feel like they relate, or they're not meeting you. They feel like they're just in proximity. So those things are just strongly tied. So we have to think about, well, and again, we're learning how to build together, to actually find out what all those ancient traditions were talking about regarding the unique energies of the feminine and the masculine together. Like, we're realizing what that is. And I think we have had inadequate coordination mechanisms by which to do that for most of the 20th and 21st century, based on capital markets, hike, and all of that. And now we have a new social coordination mechanism by which we may actually begin to realize what all of this is about.
There's something so key about the energetics of all of it, you know. I was just thinking as you were talking about, Like whenever I go to the Greek island where my father's from, um, when like the feeling I have when I'm there is just it's a very particular change in the energetics and the things that become important, and all of these things, not just from a being on holiday standpoint, but like the things that it kind of like aligns, for me, is very different, and it's very deep, you know, and it's ancestral. Like I can feel, yeah, I feel the connection in a much deeper sense through time to something. And it's the same. Look, I mean, it's a slightly different feeling, but even when I go back to New Zealand, which is where I grew up, it's the same. There's an energetic shift when you return to like land, and tradition and lineage, um, that that is undeniable. I just think once you tune into the stuff, it's undeniable. And so I bring that up because I often, when I am like facing decisions, or I'm thinking about what on earth it is that I'm doing with my life here, in Australia, you know, I often almost purposely try to go and sort of bring that feeling up within me. Like I almost like return kind of imaginally, to those places, and because it brings something clarifying to your directionality, or but I see that as it's not just like a positive psychology exercise of like trying to go to a place where you feel good, your happy, safe place. It's not that. It's actually about there's something that I feel like I'm drawing on there energetically from like from my ancestors is really the best way of putting it. There's something to it. It's not just oh, it makes me feel calm in my nervous system, so I'll be able to make a better decision. You can do those too. I mean, but those places would be different, the ones that I generate, because you know, like the island, that I'm talking about, it's not necessarily one of a beautiful, positive, ancestral, you know, set of stories. It's yeah, you know what I'm saying. It's heavy, but there's something energetic about that sort of brings me into some sense of alignment. So that was just a yeah, beautiful.
Just extremely quick. I don't think it's by chance we're in a world where nobody feels like they can emotionally regulate themselves, and there are no roots, and there's no history, and people aren't connected to like there is something about roots in that Simone Weil sense. There's something about history and tradition that helps with emotional regulation. When you don't feel like you're rooted, you panic because nothing's holding you in place. Like you're more prone to panic, right? And so a lack of tradition and lineage, um, it makes you more prone to be unable to emotionally regulate, and therefore good evidence. Well, and therefore as a heuristic, evidence that a relationship is actually of a lineage and built. So how do you tell which relationships are building and in a sense relationships versus just kind of acquaintances? Maybe a sign could be your ability to emotionally regulate in them, or the ability to actually give over to the fullness of emotions, because that means there's something there holding you there, like you're holding you there, right? Or even the ability to express anger and not, and actually in the good way that we've talked about, right? If you don't feel like you can without ruining it, then there's a lack of history, a lack of lineage, a lack of tradition, right? And so, and then of course, if you can't emotionally regulate as thus, you're more prone to mental illness and all those other things that can happen, right? So, yes, I think that feeling of roots is really, really, really important, and it actually kind of helps us hold ourselves in a manner that can then contribute to, well, and then you're talking about that energetic shift you feel when you say go back to New Zealand, you go, there is a sense in which we all want to be the kinds of people that bring energetic shifts that feel like they're unlocking something to wherever we go and to whatever people we meet. And I think if the question of being a man and being a woman are meaningful, it's to the degree of figuring out how to bring that energetic unlocking into wherever you go, right? To help unlock people from enclosures, self-relating, like ironies, tensions, like fights they've been having for 20 years, a loss of life or joy in their life. Like you want to be or work to be potentially bringing in that energetic change. But here's the funny thing. You can't, I don't think you can do that if you think of yourself as someone who brings about energetic change. You have to self-forget. You have to not think about it. You have to just be letting life unfold, because the moment you think about it, you're in the ego, but you're going to think about it because you come up against something you're not ready for. You didn't learn how to lift what you didn't lift weights. So there's a problem and you become insecure and it all falls apart. So you actually have to do all of these works, like go into jiu-jitsu, to precisely be the person that doesn't think of yourself as someone who energetically changes environments and thus can. So that's a kind of fullness, because you're just in the dance and you're doing whatever it is to be alive well. But I appreciate everything you were saying, Aspasia.
I'm just over here listening again, taking it all in. Yeah, I mean, I get a feeling of building from coming to these conversations, and you know, partly because it's a series of conversations too. There's a sense of, well, we'll pick up where we left off, and whatever isn't resolved here, we will come back to it. I think there's a sense of, yeah, being held by that. I mean, this YouTube channel it's funny to call it a tradition, but it's like we've got a little tradition going on here. And that's
absolutely.
Yeah. So, but that's about all I got right now. I guess I'll say one other thing is like this sense of spending a lot of time during this dialogue of not knowing quite what to say, but being here in the room. And then when something came that I could put forward, you both did something with it, right? So that I really like that phrase, building together. I mean, it's a very simple phrase, but to think of it as like again, as a phenomenological experience or as a somatic experience. It's like, oh, that's right, something. I mean, there's the question of belonging, which often can be just like negating the negative of I don't belong or something like that. But to really be able to look at another person and say, we created something, because that always, I mean, if I create something, by myself at home, I can sort of claim this is mine. But as soon as we do it together, even if I know some of the ingredients I gave and some of the ingredients you gave, there's a thing that appeared, and there is this feeling of magic when it is co-created. And yeah, just one other thing that's coming to mind. I don't want to like really try to flesh this out too much, but is just that the masculine and the feminine, if we would say that they fit together in a particular way, and again, acknowledging that we both have both of these energies, but there's a way that the feminine can be a mirror for the masculine. The masculine can be a mirror for the feminine. Like just even like walking down the streets and people are paying attention or people are not paying attention. Well, maybe I'm, the same person gets attention on certain days versus not. What is that? And this is something that has just become interesting to me recently too, is to, if I have an experience with another person, just to the degree that tells me something about myself, it tells me something about how I showed up today. And I mean, you could say this about anyone, but okay, so here I will just go to the language of how women respond to me, right? But women respond to me differently on different days, and obviously I'm showing up differently on different days. But the idea that I could see the women in my life as a particular mirror that would tell me something about my energetic expression is another thing that's sort of come up recently that feels fresh. And again, I sort of leave it there because I don't feel like I have some deep insight into it, but it's another lens that I find myself looking through that I wasn't using before, particularly. So just a result of stirring this pot, you know.
Oh, I love that. I love that because that's also I think that's an experience everyone can relate to, and it's a useful way to approach it, as opposed to what often happens, which is just you could just get pissed off on the days when you're
Yes.
not getting
Yeah.
attention. You get pissed off at them, you know, or you could self-attack, or like, you know, like there's as opposed to a wondering and actually looking at it as potentially an energetic thing as well. No, I think that was a great example.
Well, just as a quick comment, so there's something interesting where I think sometimes people also like there's this, you know, certainly there were controversies in, say, Christianity or Christianity Today talking about complementarianism, this idea that men and women complement one another. And there can be a kind of resistance to that because also, like, you know, even the language, although I completely agree with it on male and female fitting together, like you said right there, Seth, because there's some truth to some kind of fittingness, right? Now, of course, but then many people are like, well, my experience of men and women being together is awful. There's constant fighting. They don't seem to fit together at all, right? They don't seem to complement at all. There's this feeling that complementarianism is just a language that men use to control women, actually. Like, if, you know, that the woman has more to lose in complementarianism than the male can be a sense of it, right? And, you know, and so there's people that are wounded, but a way I sometimes think about it, and I don't know if it, you know, is that because I think what Seth was just saying there is really kind of important. Like the male in the presence of the female can have an experience of their energetics where they see something they don't see. And then that's actually the work of the masculine in a certain way, right? Like I want to say a lot. So if we say male and masculine, make a distinction here, which I will not promise I've held well this entire conversation, but if I use it right here, there's a way in which a lot of males are defining masculinity in regard to the social script and how they fit into it. And that's where you get into all the oppression stuff and there's problem, right? And so with the female. There's a way in which what is suggested here is that the male needs to define and realize or find out what masculinity is in light of their energetic response to the female, right? Like that, what they do in the encounter, right? The surprise, right? And otherwise, masculinity becomes a script you're trying to match, as opposed to, I suppose, a seed that's blossoming, like to find out what it is, right? So a way I might think about it is, I guess I was just thinking as you were talking, Seth, perhaps what I want to say is the male needs to encounter the female as a work of art, and the female needs to encounter the male as a work of art, and they need to do the work of interpreting that work of art. Like instead, like in, you know, instead, like the complementary, because sometimes I think people can hear computarianism, which I cannot say, as it's just men and women just magically fit together. They just kind of magically fit. But then there's a thousand sermons about marriage being hard and stuff. And it's like, how do we put this together? Marriages are hard. People are constantly suffering in relationships, but they're supposed to complement one another, like as if it just kind of magically fit. Like how they fit together is not self-evident. And that's when, say, conservatives can fall back on some nostalgic scripts about, well, they fit together because the male goes off and he makes money and the women stay home with the kids. Oh, so you're defining fit according to those social scripts, right? And that seems to be the problem. But I think the fittedness that Seth is pointing to that is proper is the kind of Aristotelian mean that can arise between when both parties do the work of interpretation in light of the work of art that is the other. And this is where I actually think basically learning the skills of the humanities and reading and philosophy and literature is actually critical to this problem. Because I actually do think the proper way that males and females relate is by relating to one another as works of art they need to interpret. Because interpretation is interesting because you have to do work on yourself to interpret, right? And notice if they are a work of art, oh, that automatically is an honoring, right? And if you say, well, I think it's a bad work of art, well, there's many paintings of like Picasso or whatever you look at and say, this is not very good. I don't like this work of art. Yes, but it's a work of art. So you still have to give it a certain level of dignity. And maybe you think it's bad because you suck. Like you haven't done the work to figure it out. You know, like the work of art that you don't like always raises the question of, is it bad or are you just not able to unlock it? And so I think when you think about men and women having a certain work of interpretation they need to do with and on one another, and then not to get a definition, but to determine the artfulness to unlock the energy that is in that work of art. Then I think we start to kind of have the right way to think about this complementing, this fittingness, because you're looking for what is the fitting interpretation for the sound and the fury. What is the fitting interpretation? And the way you can determine you have found fittedness, because that's the other problem. Because if you say, well, men and women complement one another, and we know they do, and we know this family is doing it well because they have $200,000, they have 2 kids, and they're living in this house. So we determine fittedness relative to the signs of economic success. And that's where more progressive people are correct to say that is problematic and oppressive. But if fittedness is instead, oh, we have found the fitting interpretation of the female work of art and the masculine, the male work of art because of the energetic unlocking. It is unlocked and energetic between us. Now we are able to create and experience things between us that we didn't even know were possible. And that is how, for me, I guess I want couples, I guess in some respects, I think it is healthy. I think it is helpful. It is healthy for male and female couples to not think in terms of even roles. Like, you can get into trouble thinking in terms of roles or what I'm supposed to do and kind of ethics and, you know, different categories and complementarianism and different things. Even though all of that has truth, I think you want to lead with it is good for the couple to view one another as interpreting works of art in one another, and to unlock something special that can come out with that. And then it actually turns out to be good at interpretation. You need to do jiu-jitsu. You need to learn how to use a saw. You need to do like, people have not linked together like physical exercise with being good at interpretation. No. You get good at interpretation by reading a bunch of books and studying. And no, it's the exact opposite. You don't get good at interpreting books unless you live a life. You got to live to the fullest. And then you learn to interpret by living, because you gather experiences that you can bring into your interpretation. So to stress interpretation as such is not to say everyone needs to be bookish or treat everyone like a specimen under a magnifying glass. And no. It means you have to go live. You have to get really good at living. And then once you've done that, you can bring to the space the conditions of possibility for interpreting the work of art well, of the other person in the relationship. And of course, this applies to friendship just as well. In fact, in friendship, like in some respects, and then you could argue that a marriage only works to the degree there's also a friendship dimension. You get into all of that. That has to be expanded upon. But there is something about the difference between a friendship, like a friend, and an associate, where an associate is someone of whom you do transactions and exchanges with. A friend is someone you interpret as a work of art. And that is a very different energetic experience.
Yeah, and interpretation is it's in the body. It's in the body. It's what I always say. You need the body. And once again, I think about with women, there is a lot more that is just happening in the body, like even every month, that is you can look at that as like calling for attention, to remember the body, to integrate what's going on in the body, to pay attention to what's happening with the body, to bring that into your day to day. And I see, again, these are all just generalities and broad brush strokes, I have to say that. But I see a lot of challenges that women are up against when they turn away from that and they try to smooth everything over, and not pay attention to just changes in the body. You could think about that in all sorts of ways. It's similar in things like pregnancy. Just whether or not there is a tuning into what is happening in the body, as up and down as all of that is, versus a desire to distract from it, or to overly medicalize it, and all these sorts of things as well. There's a huge conversation in all of that. But if we're going to talk about men, I imagine it's a similar kind of thing we're talking about, in terms of actually going out and being physical and being in one's body and being in one's strength, and cultivating skills of that is going to be vitally necessary to being able to do any of this kind of interpretation that we're talking about. I was almost thinking it's like interpretive dance, isn't it? Like the dance isn't it? But now we're in the land of interpretive dance. Yeah, that is yeah. I'm curious to see the wonderful thunderstorm.
We survived it because there were 4 like massive lightning strikes and then it stopped kind of. But if I turn the camera, that's just the garage roof.
Don't say that. Tell me that's the thunderstorm.
Like that way. Look,
Oh,
that
wow.
way.
Look at that
That's
view.
what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
The mountains and stuff.
All
Maybe
the
we'll
way
see
there.
lightning. Oh, that would be a miracle. If hopefully there will be a giant lightning bolt. That
I
would be
think for our
amazing.
next conversation, if there's a storm, you should just have your camera face.
Just have it that way. That
Yeah.
would be
And I'll just
fantastic.
superimpose like an AI of your face with like the
Yeah,
mountains.
that's fine. Over it, like, oh, there was kind of one the moment I turned it away.
Of course
Gosh,
there
that
was.
sucks.
Of course there
Of
was.
course it
It's
was.
playing with you.
Right over it. But yeah, this topic's really important. And again, I did like there again, there's something true to the fit in the comment. And I'm not, it has to be realized in the interpretive dance. Like it is in that interpretive dance. And the problem is it's almost like we'll talk with Bonhoeffer, the difference between cheap and costly fit. There's a kind of cheap fit that is just, oh, this is the social script. And I think many of the women are fighting that, or the social script. But then there's the costly fit that comes from the work of the interpretive dance. That is the work of interpretation. And that is extremely beautiful because it is the fittedness of the love that moves the sun and other stars, like Aristotle is saying, right? But in an age that doesn't know how to get that energy that is love between male and female, we're going to talk about fittedness as social scripts for the economic model. And so the progressives are like, this is oppressive. And they're exactly right, because the way men and female complement one another tends to create the women in terms of shadow work, as Ivan Illich talks about it, right? So that's very problematic. But then if you just say, well, then it's all arbitrary, there's no fittedness at all, well, then we're freaking screwed. But it's the fittedness. There is a fitting interpretation of the Sound and the Fury. There's a fitting interpretation that's going to unlock the energy, and the angle of the camera is funny. And I should go to bed. But
it's fitting.
We just have to treat one another as works of art. That we're in the business of interpreting and realizing something realize something about ourselves we otherwise could not. And you can't do that without a certain tradition, a certain commitment, a certain coming back, return, doing it again. So it's very important. Yeah. I think you're both magical.
Be a title of the podcast about the penis.
About the penis would be a little bit too highbrow. I think we should just call it penis.
Yeah, I think that's the way. I think
you
this
might
is
get
fantastic.
More views this time around.
You definitely would get more views. There is no doubt. Okay, fantastic.
We're very grown up. We just like to make lots of jokes about a penis at the end. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is always funny when new avenues of YouTube open up. That's always lovely. It's like the new continent now. You know, instead of having Christopher Columbus go across the ocean and find this land we didn't know was there, now people are exploring. Look, this new area of YouTube we found. And they like colonize it and they claim, and they're like, it's just like there were people already there and they just like claim it and stuff. Yeah, it's gonna be great. Yeah, it's like this is how we find our new continents. It's
That's
grand.
actually very true.
Yep. Like we're searching for new places for the algorithm. It's fantastic. Manifest destiny kind of thing. So that is really, really grand.
Well,
but that's
we're all over
you.
it. We're all over it
Yeah,
as a trio.
we're totally all over it.
We've got the whole authentic resonance just to ourselves here. No one's trying to take this away from us.
No one's trying. This is us. So it's no Columbus coming over here.
A sovereign island somewhere in the middle of the ocean.
Island.
Right.
We need a flag. Why don't we have a flag? We haven't made an authentic resonance flag. Dang it.
And by island, we mean like an empty plastic container that we're just like teetering on.